Good evening, everyone. I am Turok, and I welcome you all to tonight's stream. Tonight, I'm going to be reading through a book that I've actually got physically recently, and I'm very interested in the series. It's Star Trek: The Sorrows of Empire, an entry in the Mirror Universe series of novels by David Mack. This was not the start of it, however. It actually started with another a mini series called Glass Empires. That was a series of three short stories, each taking place in the 22nd, 23rd, and 24th centuries, respectively, based off of Enterprise, TOS, and the Next Generation. One of those was The Sorrows of Empire, which was popular enough to warrant its own full-length novel, not just its short story form. So, how to describe the Mirror Universe? Effectively, the Mirror Universe is an alternate reality living concurrent with what we know as the Prime Universe. But whereas the Prime Universe has the United Federation of Planets, a benevolent group of planets dedicated to scientific research, exploration, and peace throughout the galaxy. The Mirror Universe has the brutal and tyrannical Imperial Terran Empire, whereas the Federation's modus operandi is exploration and peace and peaceful exploration. The Terran Empire and this Imperial Starfleet runs off of militaristic force, and a civilian population that is suppressed by the Emperor Empress of the Empire. In fact, this background here, what you're seeing, is actually from the TOS show, from the episode Mirror Mirror. It is the same set, but it has the markings of the Imperial Terran Empire, the globe of the Earth impaled on a broadsword, showcasing its military force, and to showcase the darker tone of the Mirror Universe compared to the Prime Universe. Heroes are villains. Villains are either heroes or much more evil. And instead of the USS designation for United Starship of the Federation, in the Mirror Universe, Empire starships are designated ISS, Imperial Starship. Like here, the ISS Enterprise. Now then, let's begin. From what might yet be, if only we have enough courage. Historians note, The Sorrows of Empire begins in mid-2267, shortly after the four crew members of the USS Enterprise crossed over to an alternate universe, from the episode Mirror Mirror, and concludes in 2295, 2 years after the Khitomer Accords were signed by the United Federation of Planets and the Klingon Empire, as seen in Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country. All events occur in the Mirror Universe. So the episode Mirror Mirror is an episode of the original series where Kirk, McCoy, Scotty, and Uhura were basically doing negotiations with a planet of people called the Halkins, a pacifistic race who had a vast reserve of dilithium crystals that the Federation needed. However, the Halkins did not want to give it to the Federation because they did not believe that the Federation could prove that the use of it would be for peaceful terms. Because the Halkins did not want any of their resources to be used indirectly for violence. So when they were teleporting back to the Enterprise, an ion storm caused their pattern buffer to be swapped with equivalents in an alternate universe, thus causing the landing crew to try to find their way back to their universe, while at the same time blending in among the crew to find how much different and brutal life among an Imperial starship is. And yes, that is when we saw for the first time Spock with a goatee. If anyone's curious as to where that came from, it came from Mirror Mirror. This this book starts off shortly after that episode. In every revolution, there was one man with a vision. Captain James T. Kirk. Part 1. Sic Semper Tyrannis. 2267. Chapter 1. The Marriage of True Minds. Crushing Captain Kirk's windpipe was proving far easier than Spock had ever dared to imagine. The captain of the ISS Enterprise struggled futilely in the merciless grip of his half-Vulcan first officer. Kirk's fists struck at Spock's torso, ribs, groin. His fingers pried at Spock's hold, clawed at the backs of the hands that were strangling him. Spock's grasp only closed tighter, condemning Kirk to a swift death by suffocation. Killing such an accomplished officer as Kirk seemed a waste to Spock. And waste, as Kirk's alternate universe counterpart had reminded Spock only a few days earlier, was illogical. Unfortunately, as Spock now realized, it was sometimes necessary. Kirk's strength was fading, but his eyes were still bright with cunning. He twisted and reached forward to pluck Spock's agonizer from his belt, only to find the device absent. Removing it had been a grave breach of protocol, but Spock had decided that willfully surrendering to another the means to let himself be tortured was also fundamentally illogical. He would no longer accede to the Terran's obsessive culture of self-inflicted suffering. It was time for a change. Marlena Moreau stood in the entryway of Kirk's sleep alcove, sharp and silent while she watched Spock throttle Kirk to death in the middle of the captain's quarters. There was no bloodlust in her gaze, a crude affection Spock had witnessed in many humans. Instead, she wore a dark expression, one of determination tinged with regret. Her sleepwear was delicate and diaphanous. I don't know how to pronounce that one. But her countenance was hard and unyielding. She was like a steely blade in a silken sheath. Still, Kirk struggled. Again, it struck Spock how great a waste this was, and the words of another universe's Captain Kirk returned to his thoughts. The argument that had forced Spock to confront the futility of the Imperial mission to which his civilization had been enthralled. The other Kirk has summed up the intrinsic flaw of the Empire with brevity and clarity. The illogical waste, Mr. Spock, he had said, of lives, potential, resources, time. I submit to you that your empire is illogical because it cannot endure. I submit that you are illogical for being a willing part of it. And he had been unequivocally right. Red stains swam across the eyes of this universe's Captain Kirk. Capillaries in the whites of his eyes had ruptured, hemorrhaging blood inside the eye sockets. Seconds more and it would be over. There had been no choice, no hope of altering this Kirk's philosophy of command or politics. His doppelganger urged Spock to seize command of the ISS Enterprise, find a logical reason to spare the resistant Vulcans, and convince the Empire that it was the correct course. Spock had hoped he could achieve such an aim without resorting to mutiny. He had never desired command, nor had he been interested in politics. Science, reason, research. These had always been Spock's core interests. They remained so now. But the circumstances had changed. Despite all of Spock's best formulated arguments, Kirk had refused to consider mercy for the Vulcans. Even when Spock had proved through logical argument that laying waste to the Vulcans' cities would in fact only impede the Empire's efforts to mine the planet's dilithium, Kirk has not been dissuaded. And so had come Kirk's order to obliterate the planet's surface, to exterminate the Vulcans and erase their civilization from the universe. To speak out then would have been suicide. So Spock had stood mutely by while Kirk grinned and chuckled with malicious self-satisfaction and watched the planet die. Now it was Spock's turn to watch Kirk expire in his grip. But Spock took no pleasure in it. He felt no sense of satisfaction, nor did he permit himself the luxuries of guilt or regret. This was simply what needed to be done. Kirk's pulse slowed and weakened. A dull film glazed the captain's eyes, which rolled slowly back into his skull. He went limp in Spock's grasp, and his clutching clawing hands fell to his sides. Dead weight now. He sagged halfway to his knees. Not wanting to fall victim to a ruse, Spock took the precaution of inflicting a final twist on Kirk's neck, snapping it with a quick turn. Then he let the body fall heavily to the deck, where it landed with a dull thud. Yeesh. You thought your boss was mad. Marlena inched cautiously forward, taking Spock's measure. We should get rid of his body, she said, stepping gingerly in bare feet. She walked over Kirk's corpse. His loyalists have already been dealt with, Spock interjected. Show me the device. He did not need to elaborate. She had been beside him in the transporter room when the other universe's Kirk had divulged to him the existence of a unique weapon. One Kirk had promised to make Spock invincible. The device, which Marlena called the Tantalus Field, had been the key to the swift rise of this universe's Kirk through the ranks of the Imperial Starfleet. Marlena led Spock to a nearby wall, on which was mounted a trapezoidal panel. She touched it softly at its lower right corner, then at its upper right corner, and it slid soundlessly upward, revealing a small display screen flanked by a handful of buttons and dials. This is how you turn it on. With a single delicate touch, Marlena activated the device. These are the controls. Demonstrated, Spock said, on the captain's body. He observed her actions carefully, memorizing patterns and deducing functions. With a few push buttons, she conjured an image of the room in which they stood. Some minor adjustments on the dials narrowed the image's focus to the body on the floor. She then pressed a single button segregated from the others inside a teardrop-shaped mounting, and a blink of light filled the room behind them. Marlena lifted her arm to shield her eyes, but Spock let his inner eyelids spare him from the flash. It was over in a fraction of a second, leaving him with a palpable tinge of electric potential and the lingering scent of ozone mingled with Marlena's delicately floral Delton perfume. On the floor, there was no trace of Kirk. No hair, no scorch marks, no blood. Not a single bit of evidence of murder had occurred. Satisfied, he nodded at Marlena, who shut off the device. Most impressive, he remarked. Yes, she replied. He let me use it a few times. I only know how to target one person at a time, but he told me once it could do much more in the right hands. Indubitably, Spock said. The communicator on his belt beeped twice. He lifted it from his half pocket and flipped it open. Spock here. This is Lieutenant D'Amato. The ship is secured, sir. One detail loomed in paramount in Spock's thoughts. Have you dealt with Mr. Sulu? Aye, sir, D'Amato replied. He's been neutralized. Well done, Mr. D'Amato. Spock out. Spock closed his communicator and put it back on his belt. He crossed the room to a wall-mounted comm panel and opened an intra-ship PA channel. Attention all decks. This is Captain Spock. As of 1426 hours, I have relieved Captain Kirk and assumed command of this vessel. Continue on course for Gamma Hydra 4. That is all. Spock out. He thumbed the channel closed and turned to face Marlene. It would seem for now that the circumstances favor us. Not entirely, she said. Last night, Kirk filed a report with Starfleet Command about the alternate universe. He calls people anarchistic and dangerous. He told Starfleet he suspected you of helping breach the barrier between the universes. Her news was not entirely unexpected, but was still unfortunate. Did the captain speculate why I might have done such a thing? No, Marlena said. But he made a point of mentioning your attempt to convince him to spare the Hawkins. He nodded once. It would have been preferable for there to be no official record of the other universe's existence, he said. What has been done cannot be undone. We must proceed without concern for details beyond our control. Looking into her eyes, he knew that for now, she was the only person on this ship, perhaps even in the universe, whom he could really trust. But even her motives were not entirely beyond suspicion. At least, not yet. But if the Terran Empire and its galactic neighbors were to be spared the ravages of a brutal social implosion, followed by a devastating dark age unlike any in recorded history, he would have to learn to trust someone beyond himself. and teach others to do the same. Picturing the shifting possibilities of the future, he knew he had already committed himself. There was no turning back from the epic task he had just set for himself. The great work begins. Congratulations, Captain, a passing junior officer said as he saluted Spock, who dutifully returned the gesture, while continuing down the corridor to his new cabin. Pomp and fanfare had never appealed to Spock. Pageantry had its uses in the affairs of the Empire, but aboard a starship was a needless frivolity, a distraction ill-afforded. He preferred to focus on tasks at hand, on business of running the ship. The crew, sensing his mood, had obliged him, but the human compulsion to laud success was irrepressible, and he accepted it with stoic grace. His ascendance to command, however, was only the second most compelling item of news on board the Enterprise. The crew was buzzing with hearsay of the alternate universe. Chief Engineer Scott, Dr. McCoy, and Lieutenant Uhura, despite having been ordered to secrecy during their debriefings, apparently felt liberated to speak freely of it now that Kirk has been assassinated. Spock had made no effort to curtail the rumors or to interdict the crew's personal communications. The truth was that attempting to rein it in would be futile. It had a life of its own now, so he decided to let it be. He arrived at the captain's cabin, which he had claimed as his own. The door opened with a soft hiss. On the other side of the threshold, he was met by the dry heat and a dim reddish-amber glow that he preferred for his private quarters. A crude approximation of the light and climate of his home world of Vulcan. He was pleased to see the last of Captain Kirk's belongings had been removed from the compartment, and his own possessions had been moved in. On the far side of the room, Marlena was gently hanging his Vulcan lute on the wall. Spock stepped farther into the room, clear of the door's sensor. The portal slid shut behind him. Marlena turned and folded her hands in front of her waist. "I assume this is where you would want it displayed," she said. "It is," Spock said. He had not expected her to still be there. She had been Kirk's woman for some time, and though she had sympathized with Spock's cause, he had anticipated little more from her than silent acquiescence. Apparently, she had taken it upon herself to supervise the transfer of his personal effects and to complete the preparation for his new quarters. "You received several personal transmissions in the past few hours," she said, moving to the cabinet where the beverages were stored. "Some from other starship captains, and some from the Admiralty, even one from Grand Admiral Garth himself." "Yes," Spock replied. "I have already read them." She opened the cabinet and took out a bottle of Vulcan port and two short squarish glasses. "Missives of congratulation, no doubt." She glanced up at Spock, who nodded in confirmation. Then she half-filled both glasses with a bright green liquid. He accepted the glass she offered him. By reflex, he sniffed it once to try to discern any telltale fragrance of toxins lurking in his tart, fruity bouquet. Keen to a suspicion, Marlena smirked. "It's not poisoned, but if it will make you feel more comfortable, we can swap glasses." "Unnecessary," Spock said, and he took a drink. At that, she smiled. "Trust?" His tone was calm and even, a calculated risk. With slow and languid grace, she reached up and stroked her fingertips across his bearded chin. "I've been a captain's woman, Spock. Am I still?" A stirring in the dark corners of his soul, the animal cry of his human half. It felt something for this woman, a hunger and a need. Dominated by his Vulcan discipline and this credo of unemotional logic, his human passions were deeply buried, strange and unfamiliar to him, but they paled in comparison to the savage desires of his ancient Vulcan heritage, whose lethal furies were the reason his people relied on the dictums of logic for their continued survival as a culture. As if with a will of its own, his left hand rose and cupped Marlena's cheek, then traveled through her warm dark hair. It was soft and fell over his fingers like a lover's breath. Her skin was warm. His fingertips rested on the side of her scalp, while she traced a line with her nails down his throat. "You are still the captain's woman," he said. Her hand moved along his clavicle to his shoulder, down the length of his arm until it came to a rest on top of his own hand, on the side of her face. "When I was a girl, I heard stories about Vulcans who can touch minds," she said. "Is it true?" "Yes," he said, revealing his people's most closely guarded secret, one for which entire species, such as the Betazoids and the Oleans, have all been exterminated. We hide our powers from outsiders, and such a bond is never performed lightly. The melding of two minds is a profound experience. She took a half step closer to him, all the while holding eye contact and keeping her hand pressed against his. Do both people know what's happening? They become as one, Spock said. No secrets remain. Resting her free hand against his chest, she whispered, I wouldn't resist if you wanted to. It was subtle, nimble, and quick. His fingers changed position of the side of her face, spreading apart like the legs of an arachnid, singing out the local neural pathways. Marlena tensed and inhaled a short, sharp breath. Though she had said she wouldn't resist, she couldn't have known what the touch of a Vulcan mind meld would really feel like. Nothing could have prepared her for the total loss of privacy, the ultimate exposure of her inner self to another consciousness. Even the most willing participants resisted their first time. My mind to your mind, Spock intoned, his rich baritone both soothing and authoritative. Our thoughts are merging. I know what you know. Our minds become one. We are one. The dark flower of her mind bloomed open in his thoughts, and the coldly rational structures of his logic gave form to her chaos of passions and appetites. Fears fell silent, motives were laid bare, and the union of their psyche was complete. Years, days, and moments wove together into a shared tapestry of their past. The cold disapproval of Spock's father, Sarek, stood in sharp contrast to the volcanic fury of Marlena's father, Frank Hoyle. An icy stare tore open a silent gulf between a father and son. A broad palm slapped a young girl's face again and again, leaving the hot sting of betrayal in his wake. I have made my decision, Father. I'm sorry, Daddy. Please stop. Don't. Defenses took root, grew coarse, became permanent barriers. Marlena's weapon of choice was seduction. Spock's preferred implement was logic. He planned ahead, a master chess player thinking 24 moves beyond his current position. She lived in the moment, moved with the shifting currents of power and popular opinion, never planning for tomorrow, because who knew what the universe would be like by then. Yin and Yang, they stood enmeshed in one another's thoughts. She, quick to anger, rash to act, desperately seeking one moment of tenderness, one solitary moment of affection, in a life that promised nothing but strife and loneliness. He, aloof and alone, desiring only knowledge and order, but watching the Empire begin an inexorable slide towards collapse and chaos. All they had in common was their shared experience of meeting the humans from the other universe. The glimpse of a reality so much like theirs, yet so different. He admired their discipline, their restraint, their stability. Marlena yearned to live among people of such nobility and compassion. Blending her memories with his own, Spock knew that the qualities he had so respected in the visitors and the ones that Marlena envied were inseparable. The other's self-control and focus and collective effort were made possible by the peaceful ethos they embraced. Spock had also not forgotten that their visitors' merciful ways had saved his own life. And the alternate Dr. McCoy had risked being left behind in the cosmos in order to save Spock from what would have been a fatal subcranial hemorrhage. Marlena had witnessed that moment as well with Kirk's alien assassination device. What she hadn't seen was that after Spock had risen from the table, he had mind-melded with McCoy, the force the truth from his weak human brain, beheld a vision of a universe the visitors called home. It was not without its conflicts, but the civilization to which the humans belonged was no empire. It was a federation, a democratic society committed to peaceful exploration and coexistence, eschewing violence except in its own defense or that of others who asked for their aid. That would be a society worth fighting for, worth saving. In every revolution, there was one man with a vision. Marlena reached up and gently pressed her fingertips against the side of Spock's face. I share your vision. There were no lies in the mind melds. Spock knew that she spoke the truth. She knew his thoughts, understood what he meant to do. Though she likely did not realize at all the consequences of what would follow, her sincerity was unimpeachable. For the first time in his life, he knew knew what it was to be simpatico with another being. They were each the first person whom the other had ever truly trusted. Though they knew the galaxy would likely align itself against them and their goals, they were not afraid, because at that moment, in that place, they had one another. They were one another. They were one. He pulled back from her. He had pulled back from her mind. Loath to be left alone once more, she resisted his departure, clung to his thoughts, pleaded without words for a few more moments of silent intimacy. It was a labor to leave her mind, and for a moment he hesitated. Then discipline reasserted itself, and he gently removed his fingers, or her fingers, from his face. And as he severed the psychic link, tears welled in her eyes as she looked up at him. His mind, mask-like and vaguely sinister, did not betray the swell of newfound emotions or newfound feelings he had for her. But then, despite his best intentions, a savage chord in his nature asserted its primal desires. He pulled her close and kissed her with a passion no Vulcan would admit to outside sacred rites upon fall. She kissed him back, not with hunger or aims of seduction, but with devotion, with affection, with love. Though he would never have imagined himself destined for such a fate, he realized he might almost be able to let himself reciprocate her feelings. How ironic, he mused, that after all the times I have chided Sarah for choosing a human mate, I should now find myself emulating his behavior. Embracing Marlena, he knew that he would never give her up and that she would never betray him. Whether that would be a strong enough foundation on which to erect a new future for the people of the Empire, he didn't know. But was an ember of hope, one which he planned to spark a blaze that would burn away a failed civilization already in its decline, and make way for a new galactic order that would rise from its ashes. For the love of a woman, Spock would destroy the Empire. He would ignite a revolution. So that was chapter 1. It did a really good job of laying up the groundwork. It did briefly go over the events of Mirror Mirror. And it started off pretty well. Having Spock straight up execute Kirk, while I'm fine, could have had a little bit of build-up. Thinking about it now, when you watch the episode Mirror Mirror, and then you read this novel, it does put into perspective why Spock did what he did. Now, for context, the reason why he's looking to change the Empire is because the Prime Universe Kirk had convinced him to try to make changes to the Empire. For Spock and the rest of Vulcan in his universe had agreed that the Empire had a little over a century before total collapse. And once that happened, the entire galaxy, that would include the Alpha and Beta quadrants, would be subjected to an interstellar dark age beyond any comprehension. Think the dark ages of humans of our actual history, but far worse. Let's see how well his vision will start. Chapter 2. The Inevitability of Change. Main shuttle bay door secure. Intoned a masculine voice over the Enterprise's intership address system. Repressurizing shuttle bay. Stand by. Captain Spock, Dr. Leonard McCoy, and the Enterprise's newly promoted first officer, Commander Montgomery Scott, walked together down the corridor to the ship's main shuttle bay. The three men were attired in their dress uniforms, as were the members of the security detachment gathered at the shuttle bay door. As soon as the guards saw Spock, they snapped to attention, fists to their chest, and they extended their arms, palms forward in unison. Spock returned the salute. Shuttle bay repressurized, the voice announced. With a nod, Spock said, "Positions, gentlemen." The guards entered the shuttle bay, single file, forming an unbroken line from the door of the shuttle bay to the hatch of the just-returned shuttlecraft Galileo. Faces drawn and clutched reverently to their chests, they stood at attention, eyes front. A group of Vulcan delegates debarked from the shuttlecraft, boarding the Enterprise for transport to the Imperial Conference of the planet codenamed Babel. Sorry about that. Listen. At the front of the procession, moving with confidence and radiating personal power, was the head of the Vulcan delegation, Ambassador Sarek of Vulcan, Spock's father. Trailing behind him was Amanda, his human wife, followed by the junior members of his diplomatic entourage. They all carried with them the spicy sense of the Vulcan homeworld. It had been 4 years since Spock had last been there, and 18 years since he last exchanged words with his father. It was likely, Spock knew, that Sarek would resist any overture of reconciliation he might offer, but he would not be able to avoid interacting with Spock now that he was a captain of the Enterprise. Under different circumstances, Spock might have found the necessity of contact to be distasteful, but as matters now stood, it was a fortunate arrangement, and one he intended to exploit. He intended to exploit it. Okay. Sarek halted in front of Spock, eyed the gold tunic Spock wore, and made a silent note of the rank insignia. He looked Spock in the eyes and said in a level voice, "Permission to come aboard, Captain." Spock lifted his right hand in the Vulcan salute and waited until Sarek reciprocated the gesture before he replied. "Permission granted, Ambassador Sarek." He nodded at the two fellow officers. "Our chief medical officer, Dr. McCoy, and our first officer, Commander Scott." Scott McCoy nodded curtly to Sarek, who returned the gesture. Speaking more to Scott McCoy than to Spock, Sarek motioned to the retinue that followed him. "My aides and attachés, and she who is my wife." He held up one hand and extended his index and middle fingers together. Amanda joined him directly and pressed her own fingertips to his. They were both stoic in their quiet companionship. It was a quality of their relationship Spock had always found admirable. "Commander Scott will escort you and your wife to your quarters, Mr. Ambassador," Spock said. "Once you are settled, I look forward to offering you a tour of the ship." "Captain, I'm certain you have more pressing matters to attend to," Sarek said, as verbally agile as ever. "Perhaps one of your junior officers could guide us." He clearly did not want to interact with Spock anymore. Then was necessary to complete his assignment for the Vulcan government, but the protocols of military and diplomatic courtesy prevented him from saying so. Spock intended to turn that limitation to his advantage. "It would be my privilege, Mr. Ambassador," he said. "I insist." Of course, Sarek could simply decline the invitation entirely, but Spock knew that Sarek's devotion to the minutiae of decorum would prevent that. A subtle exhalation of breath signaled Sarek's grim acceptance of the inevitable. "Very well," he said. "My wife and I should look forward to receiving you at your earliest convenience." "Ambassador," Spock said with a half nod, bringing the discussion to a close. Sarek looked at Commander Scott, who led the middle-aged Vulcan and his wife away towards the turbo lift that would take them to their quarters. The rest of the diplomatic team was escorted from the shuttle bay by a security team, as much for their own protection as that of the other Babel conference delegates currently on board the Enterprise. McCoy turned and smirked at Spock. "Your father didn't look too happy to see you, Captain." "My father is a Vulcan, Doctor. He feels neither happy nor unhappy." The doctor snorted derisively. "I can tell you that if you want, sir, but that man is not looking forward to seeing you later," he frowned. "Pure logic, my ass. I know a grudge when I see one." "Perhaps," Spock said, "but be that as it may, I will not tolerate being interrogated on the subject by a subordinate, particularly not by one who had tortured his own father to death." McCoy bristled at the mention of his father. "Damn it, I was under orders. You know that. I was under orders." "Indeed, Doctor, as are we all." Even in this universe, Spock and McCoy still wind up button heads. The tour of the ship passed quickly. Spock escorted his parents from their quarters first to the bridge, and then through the various scientific and medical laboratories in the primary hull. Sarek made a point of limiting his remarks to no more than a few words. "I see," or "sensible," or "most logical," never asking follow-up questions and suppressing any attempt Amanda made to engage Spock in more than the most perfunctory manner. After a brief visit to the astrophysics labs and sickbay, They arrived at main engineering, which was busy with activity, most of it directed from the bridge by Commander Scott, who still growls to anyone who would listen that he had been forced to leave his beloved engines in less capable hands. Less than an hour later, the tour was finished, and Spock escorted his parents to his own quarters. He walked a step ahead of them, moving in long strides he knew his father would easily match. Stopping in front of his door, Spock turned and said curtly, "Mother, I wish to meet privately with Sarah. Please excuse us." "Of course, Spock," she said and started to step away. Sarah caught her arm and stopped her, all the while keeping his hard, dark eyes fixed on Spock. "No, my wife. Stay with me." Undeterred, Spock steeled his tone. "I must insist, Mr. Ambassador. It is a matter of great urgency." "I have nothing to say to you, Spock," Sarek declared. "You made your decision, and you must live with the consequences." Amanda looked torn between them. "Sarek, please listen." "Be silent, Amanda," Sarek said, his voice quiet but forceful. Returning his attention to Spock, he continued. "You could have been a leader on Vulcan, Spock. A man of power and influence. You rejected that for this? Most illogical." Spock hardened his resolve. "I disagree." "Naturally," Sarek said. He tried to walk away. "Let us pass. It's been a long day for my wife. We shall retire." "Ambassador," Spock said sharply, "I will speak my mind to you and you will listen. As captain of the ship, I have the power to compel your audience. Much more if I so desire. I respectfully suggest a wiser course of action that would be not to force me to resort to such barbaric tactics." Ooh. For several seconds, Sarek regarded Spock and took his measure. Spock waited while his father pondered his options. At last, Sarek folded his hands together and sighed. "As you wish, Captain. I am most interested to hear what you consider to be of such grave importance." He turned to Amanda. "I will join you when my conversation with Spock is finished." She nodded her understanding and walked away. Spock unlocked the door. It swished open and he stepped aside to let Sarek pass. "After you, Mr. Ambassador." Inside Spock's cabin, the thermostat had been adjusted to a much warmer level than normal, and almost all traces of humidity had been extracted from its air, both changes being for Sarek's benefit. Seated across a small table from Spock, Sarek's face was steeped in a long vertical shadows from the dim, crimson-hued overhead illumination. He shook his head. "Your proposal is not logical, Spock," he said. "It is grounded in sentimental illusions." "I assure you," Spock replied, "it is not." He picked up the ceramic urn of hot tea on the table between them and filled their cups as he continued. "You yourself had admitted that conquering Coridan for its dilithium resources would inevitably consume more time, personnel, and resources than it can repay." Oh, I'm sorry about that. "Advocating a policy of waste is illogical." He set down the tea urn and looked Sarek in the eye. "However, enticing Coridan to join the Empire of his own volition, particularly if it can be accomplished without resorting to threats or force, will represent a significant and immediate gain for the Empire, at a relatively moderate long-term cost." Sarek sipped his tea slowly, then set down his cup. "Even if I acknowledge the logic of your analysis, Spock, you must concede that negotiating such an agreement with a planet that we could easily or just quickly invade would make the Empire appear weak. For enemies come to believe that we would rather talk than act, they would not hesitate to strike. Introducing supplication to our foreign policy would only invite attack." "Your analysis is flawed, Sarek." The accusation provoked a glare from the elder Vulcan. He reined in his temper, then said, "Explain." "I agree that opening talks with Coridan would cause the Klingons and the Romulans to question our motives," Spock said. "But our scanners will still show our border defense to be intact and our fleets vigilant. They will not attack." Pensive now, Sarek folded his hands in front of his chest. "The other delegates will not be as receptive to this idea." "Then you must persuade them," Spock said. "It will cost the Empire less than conquest and reap it greater benefit." Spock thought that he noticed a frown on Sarek's face, as the older man rose from his table and paced around the cabin, watching his father stroll the perimeter of the room as though it was an activity of great interest, reminded Spock of his youth, growing up in Sarek's home on Vulcan. Whenever Sarek had become displeased with him, he paced like this. As ever was, so it remains, Sarek said, half under his breath. You have served the ambitions of humans all your life, no doubt thanks to the influence of your mother and your own human DNA. Assuming command of a starship has only made your devotion to the Terran's cause more strident. Why do you assume it is their interests I serve? Spreading his arms to gesture at the space around them, Sarek said, You command one of their starships. You ask me to help increase their power and wealth by proposing we invite Cordan into the Empire. What other conclusion should I draw? You have heard only the first step in my proposal. Spock pointed out, I think you will find its later stages intriguing for their anticipated effect upon the status quo. I am well acquainted with how the Terrans adjust to status quo, Sarek replied. Many times as Spock listened patiently while Sarek recounted with thinly veiled bitterness the manner in which humans, immediately following their first contact with the crew of a Vulcan scout ship, had captured the scouts, tortured them, and divulged the secrets of an interstellar navigation. In short order, the Terrans had turned the Vulcans' knowledge to their own aims, laying the foundation for the nascent Star Empire. You assume facts not in evidence, Sarek. He waited until he once again commanded Sarek's full attention. Then he continued. Strengthening the Empire is not my objective. In fact, I aim to do quite the opposite. A twinge of emotion fluttered across Sarek's countenance. Fear, perhaps? He moved slowly, positioning the table between him and his son. In a milder tone than he had used before, he said, Speak plainly, Spock. Fox, welcome. I'm halfway through Chapter 2, but I'm glad to see you, buddy. Oh, I do want to remind everybody that in the pinned comment above the chat, it is for this whole month. I, Fox, and a couple of other VTubers are helping one of our friends fund their new or contribute to their throne to get her a new PC. So if you all are able to spare a couple of dollars, even $1 or $2 will go a long way. If you can click on that throne and donate to Nuppy Z's throne to get her a better computer, it would be mostly appreciated. And if you're not able to spare the money, that's okay. All we can ask is that you spread the word. To spread the link as much as you can. And I do appreciate anyone who does that. Hey, it's okay, Fox. I just started about 50 minutes ago, so you're good. But yes, if you like to support the PC, click on the link in the pinned comment above. It will go a long way for her. Back to the story. Speak plainly, Spock. Fact. The Empire's policies of preemptive warfare and civil oppression are not sustainable and will soon collapse. Cautiously, Sarek nodded. Stipulated. Emboldened, Spock to press on. Fact. Within approximately 243 Earth years, uprising will compromise the security of the Terran Empire from within. Even as it wages a war against multiple external threats, the ensuing collapse will probably destroy millennia of accumulated knowledge, triggering an interstellar dark age without precedent in the history of local space. High-pitched warbles of sound emanated from behind the device's closed panel. Oh, whoops. Skip the page. My bad. This is what happens when I read from the physical book. And yes, I am actually reading from the physical book, even though I have a digital version of it from Kindle. Sarek nodded gravely. Vulcan's council had reached the same conclusion. The Empire's collapse is inevitable. Agreed, Spock said. The Empire cannot be saved, but the civilization it supports can be, with a different, more benign form of government. The upward pitch of Sarek's tone would barely have been noted by a non-Vulcan, but Spock had registered his indignation. You speak of treason, Spock. I speak of the inevitability of change, Sarek. He picked up Sarek's half-full cup of tea from the table and he held it before himself. The Empire will fall, and when it does, he let the cup fall to the deck. It broke into dozens of small, jagged fragments, spilling tea in an irregular puddle across the carpet. All within will be lost, unless... He picked up his own cup from the table, opened the lid on a ceramic pot in the middle of the table, and poured his leftover tea back inside. Then he casually hurled the cup against the wall, where it shattered into countless earthen shards. Several seconds passed while Sarek considered Spock's point. The metaphor had been obvious enough that Spock had not felt the need to elaborate after throwing the empty cup. He was certain Sarek understood he meant to transition the Imperial civilization to a new form of government before making a sacrifice of the Empire itself, casting it aside after it has been gutted and reduced to a hollow shell of its former self. "My son," Sarek began, sounding as though he were selecting each word with great care. "I ask this with genuine concern. Do you suffer from a mental infirmity? The question was not unexpected. Spock shook his head once. "I am in full possession of my faculties, Father." He took one step towards Sarek. "It will take time for my plan to come to fruition. I must cultivate allies and fortify a power base, but it can be done. And if we wish to prevent the sum of all Vulcan thought and achievement from being erased less than 3 centuries from now, it must be done." Sarek emerged from behind the table. He stepped slowly between the shards of the broken cups. "For the sake of our discussion, let us assume you can seize power over the Empire and maintain your hold long enough to push it towards its own demise. What do you propose should replace it?" "A constitutionally ordered representative republic," Spock said. As he expected, Sarek recoiled from the notion. "Most illogical," Sarek replied. "The Empire is too large to be governed in such a manner. It would fall into civil war." Nodding, Spock said, "As an empire, yes, but as a coalition of sovereign worlds united for their mutual benefit, much of its administration can be localized. Each planet would be responsible for its own governance, and would contribute to the interstellar defenses of the Republic." "Madness," Sarek retorted. "You would never be able to maintain control." "Irrelevant," Spock said. "When it is in each world's best interest to remain united with the others, it will no longer be necessary to compel their loyalty. Self-interest will dictate that the good of the many also benefits the few, or the one." The Elder Vulcan stopped in front of the food slot and pushed a sequence of buttons to procure more tea. High-pitched warbles of sound emanated from behind the device's closed panel. "The populace is not ready for self-rule, Spock. After centuries of dictatorship, the responsibilities of civic duty will be alien to them. They will reject it." The food slot panel lifted, revealing a new ceramic pot and 2 empty cups on a tray. Sarek picked up the tray and moved it to the table. "And our enemies will capitalize on the chaos that follows from your reforms." "I am not suggesting we dismantle Starfleet," Spock said. He moved to the tables and stood opposite his father. "If reform is to have a chance to succeed, foreign interference must be prevented." He gestured for Sarek to be seated. As his father sat, so did Spock. He reached forward, lifted the teapot, and filled his father's cup with a slow, careful pour. "I do not propose to effect my changes all at once," Spock said. "Progress must come by degrees." Spock set down the teapot. "By the time our rivals are aware of the true scope of my intentions, they will be ill-prepared to act." Leaning forward, Sarek said, "But when they do act, Spock, the reprisal will be catastrophic." He picked up the teapot and, with the measured motions of an old man in no hurry to reach the end of his life, poured tea into Spock's cup. "It is illogical to conclude that the Empire cannot endure, but to contend the solution into that problem is to preemptively destroy the Empire is counterintuitive at best." "Indeed," Spock replied as he watched Sarek set down the teapot. Spock picked up his cup and savored the gentle aroma of the herbal elixir. "But to do nothing is more illogical still." "True," Sarek said. He breathed deep the perfume of his own tea. They sipped their drinks together for several minutes, each contemplating what the other had said. It was Sarek who finally broke the silence. I find much of what you propose troubling, Spock. However, given the inevitable decline and fall of the Empire, yours seems the most logical course. Most generous, Spock said. I offer you this caveat, however, Sarek added. Even the most thoroughly logical agenda can be confounded by the actions of an irrational political actor, and humans are nothing if not irrational. They can be passionate, vindictive, sometimes even loyal. But more than any other species I have ever met, they are willing to kill and die for ideology. Most any species would fight for territory, resources, or survival. But Terrans, far beyond all the others, will readily slaughter billions and lay waste to entire worlds for the sake of an idea. Choosing the noble of two paths will not come naturally to them. They will have to be fooled into acting in their own best interest. Why do I get the feeling that hits more closer to home these days than it did when this book came out? There was wisdom in Sarek's words. Spock knew. Your point is well taken, he said. Perhaps it is my own human ancestry that has spurred on this admittedly ideological course of action. That, most of all, is why I humbly seek to enlist you as my chief political counsel. I would be honored. Rising from his seat, Spock said, There's also one matter of importance. Gesturing towards the sleep nook in the back of the cabin, he called out, Marlena, join us. Sarek also stood as Marlena appeared from the shadows. She was attired in her night clothes, and her long, dark hair was tousled. She strode to Spock's side and clutched delicately at his arm. Shouldn't have woken me, she said with a glare. I was having a good dream for a change. Spock ignored her complaint. This is Lieutenant Marlena Moreau, my fiancée. Turning to her, he continued. Marlena, this is Ambassador Sarek of Vulcan, my father. She looked quickly from Spock to Sarek, then blushed with shame. Forgive me, Ambassador. I didn't mean to. I wanted to make a better first impression than this. She stammered for a few seconds more without forming any actual words. Spock and Sarek waited, each with one eyebrow raised. Emotional, isn't she? Sarek noted. Indeed, Spock admitted. Why do you wish to marry her? With a tilt of his head, Spock gave the only honest answer. It seems the logical thing to do. Sarek nodded. I understand. He took 2 short steps towards the door. Rest tonight, Spock. We will speak again before the conference. He glanced once at Marlena, then almost imperceptibly signaled his approval to Spock with the briefest hint of a nod. The future awaits us. We have much to do. And that concludes Chapter 2. Already we're already seeing what will make up the crux of the story. And we already see what Spock has in store for the Terran Empire. And we also see that, like in the Prime universe, Spock and Sarek do ultimately reconcile their differences. Because at this point in the TOS, in both universes, Spock and Sarek had a bit of a rift between them due to Spock joining Starfleet, which was against Sarek's own ideals for Spock, believing that he would do much better among Vulcan than the Federation. And that little quote about Spock saying it was a logical thing to do by marrying Marlena is actually a subtle nod to Sarek's own quote in the episode that involves this similar plot point of Sarek being on the Enterprise to attend the conference at Babel. When Spock asks Sarek why he chose to marry Amanda, that's his exact words. It is the logical thing to do. So it seems like these two are going to have a lot to do in terms of what they're planning on a galactic scale. We also get a little bit more detail on what Spock's ultimate plan is. By deconstructing the Empire down and turning it into a republic. Now, afterwards, well, we'll just have to see further on, won't we? 2268, Chapter 3, The sleep of reason. Death was close at hand. Empress Hoshisato II felt it. The shadows of her bedchamber vibrated with its icy promise. Candles flickered on the periphery of the ornately appointed room. A haze of lavender incense smoke lingered like a gauzy blanket above her head. Her Andorian physician, Dr. Thenelis, had chosen it for its cloying, quasi-medicinal sweetness, in a futile effort to mask the odors of the Empress's aging, dying body. Hoshi II found the fragrance repugnant, but after all Dr. Thenelis had done to extend her life, she didn't wish to embarrass him by ordering it removed. The soft-spoken Than had spent most of the past decade supervising the Empress's gene therapy, and transplanting vital organs and transfusing fresh blood from lobotomized clones of her predecessor, the original Empress Hoshi Sato. Her efforts had verged on the heroic, but there had been nothing more to be done. Her body felt insubstantial, as if feathered on the wind. She is as weak as the winter sun, as tired as a dream that wanted to die. Not yet, she thought, willing herself to live. She had words she needed to speak, a sacred charge she needed to impart. She beckoned with one withered hand. Come closer, sister. Soft footfalls broke the silence as their teenage twin, Hoshi Sato III, stepped out of the gloom to stand by her bed. The youth caressed a strand of gray hair from her elderly sibling's cheek with one hand. In the other, she held a wine glass filled with cabernet, the color of blood. The young woman's touch was warm, but the expression was cold as she gazed down at the Empress. I'm here, she said. I don't have much time left, the Empress said, her once melodious voice reduced to a dry rasp. The cloned echo of her youth replied without pity. So I see. The Empress summoned the last of her failing strength. I never gave you a chance to know me. I know your reputation. Then you know only a fiction. A sharp pain in the Empress's chest stole her breath. When it passed, she continued. Like the first Empress Sato, I wanted more for the Empire than war and slaughter. I wanted it to be secure, stable. Her heir apparent let slip a soft snort of derision. Forgive me for correcting your history, Majesty, but all your predecessor wanted for her dynasty was for her dynasty to be secure. She saw the Empire as little more than a means to that end. That's why we exist, because we wanted to make sure her empire had her face forever. We're nothing more than copies of the biggest narcissist in galactic history. We bear her likeness, but that doesn't mean we're doomed to live in her shadow. We could chart our own path, sister. The future sovereign smirked, an ironic statement coming from you. I ruled according to my conscience, not hers. Strange, then, that your actions have proved so similar, in fact. In fact, the only substantial difference I see in your respective reigns is that she had to conquer the Empire to become its tyrant. All you had to do was inherit it. A despot is what I became, the Empress said, not what I meant to be. Let me guess, you aspire to be a benevolent dictatorship. She rolled her brown eyes and shook her head. How banal. Sovereign's voice faltered as she weakened. I hope to reform the Empire, curb its excesses, steer it towards a nobler path. A reformer? You? Hoshi III laughed angrily. The murderess of Andoria? The woman who redefined ruthlessness for a generation? The Empress exhaled heavily and squeezed shut her eyes in anger and shame. I confess I fell for the seductions of power. Couldn't resist serving my whims, my obsessions, my base desires. It was all too much. I lost sight of myself. Recoiling and adopting a suspicious mind, the younger Sato asked, Why are you telling me this, Majesty? So that you can learn from my mistakes, the Empress said. I no longer have the strength or time to chart a new course for the Empire. You do. She reached out and grasped her twin's hands, which was smooth and supple with youth. You can steer the Terran Empire back towards honor. Young Hoshi's brow knitted with confusion and amusement. Why would I want to do that, Majesty? I spent my whole life preparing to rule, and now on the cusp of my coronation, you expect me to renounce the plenary power that's my birthright? To shoulder the burdens of a prince's throne while denying myself its most cherished perquisites, perquisites. She brusquely pulled her hand from the Empress's grasp. Have you finally lost your mind? No, I finally found my reason. The 19-year-old lunged forward as if to pounce on the bedridden sovereign. Perched on her fist, she hovered over her crone of a sister and let her lips curl into a menacing snarl. You're just a confused old woman, she said, her voice freight with contempt. Honor, nobility, you mew like a coward fresh from a Klingon mind sifter, or a child on her way to the agony booth. Regret swelled in the heart of the Empress. There would be no counseling her successor, no mitigating the ferocity or terror of the reign to come. This new monarch was a child of raw power and old privilege, a twisted product of the corrupt imperial court, a scion of a cruel ambition. Heed my words or don't, said the Empress, but do not mock me, child. She waved her hand dismissively. I need to rest. Leave me. In a moment, the teen replied, locking eyes with the Empress. Empress Sato, too, inhaled and savored one last breath, tinged with lavender incense. She knew what was coming next. The girl grabbed a pillow from the bed and pushed it down on the Empress's face, leaning it into her with all her weight and strength. The Empress flailed feebly with her emaciated arms. Though the smothering mass of pillow, she heard her successor pretend to comfort her. Shush, sister. Sleep. It'll be over in a moment. Within seconds, the last spark of the Empress's will faded, taking with it her panic and her fear. Her arms came to rest at her sides. Poised on the edge of oblivion, she expected to hate her killer. Instead, she felt only gratitude, because the Empire had at last become someone else's problem. Well, that's something. Now, for someone who isn't aware, Hoshi Sato was a character from Star Trek Enterprise. In the context of this, during the events of the short story in Glass Empires, actually before that, in the Star Trek Enterprise duology In a Mirror Darkly, the ISS Enterprise NX-01 found the USS Defiant from TOS transported to their universe via a rift, where Captain Jonathan Archer manipulated ways to actually capture the Defiant and use it to gain control of a rebellion that threatened the Empire. Having seduced and assassinated him, Hoshi took command of the Defiant. And through that, she seized control of the Terran Empire by basically destroying the Empire's headquarters in San Francisco, where she then took her own seat of power in Okinawa. From there, the short story took place, which detailed basically the start of her tenure as the Empress of the Empire. But back then, the Vulcans were still slaves to the Empire, and an alliance she struck wasn't with Vulcans, but with Andoria. This wound up proving to be a bad error, as General Shran, the person in charge of Andoria in the Imperial Guard, betrayed Empress Sato and basically took control of the Empire for his own gain. By the end of the short story, she had returned and regained control of the Empire, thus allowing and made a deal with T'Pol to bring Vulcan as official citizens of the Empire instead of just slaves. But one side plot of that story is that a binary clone was being created for her, an heir to the Empire's throne, as a plot devised by Shran. However, she did allow the clone to be fully grown, or to grow completely, but making it a binary clone, essentially like genetically engineering your own twin. That wound up being Hoshi Sato II. Now they did it again with Hoshi III. So that's a little bit of the context behind the two Hoshis. where Hoshi the second was the genetic clone of the first one between her and Shran, and the third one is the binary clone of the second one. But it seems like the Empire is going to be in for a rocky ride. Let's see how well this go. How this what this has in store for our Vulcan captain. Chapter 4: The Fire of Sacrifice. The bridge of the Enterprise was a charred husk, a sparking shell resounding within the groans of the wounded. Thick, acrid smoke shrouded the overhead. The main view screen alternated between dull blackness and bursts of static. Captain Spock had pulled himself back into the command chair and sleeved a smear of green blood from the gash on his forehead. Damage report. Lieutenant Kevin Riley struggled to coax a response from the smoldering remains of the navigator station. Excalibur's weapons have fired at full power, sir. We've lost shields and warp drive is offline. Casualties. Commander Scott looked up from the sensor display at his station. 12 dead, 17 wounded. Daystrom's A5 unit must have gone haywire, he said. Potemkin's been destroyed, and Hood and Lexington are in worse shape than we are. Analysis. Scott frowned. One more hit and we're done for. Oh, I gotta take a drink. Doing Scotty's voice is different, but I hope I'm doing a good impression. Cool. Lieutenant Yoda Uhura swiveled in her chair from the communication console to face Spock. Captain, Commander Wesley is hailing Excalibur, reported the striking, brown-skinned human. He's receiving no response. Helm, Spock said, initiate evasive maneuvers. Jabbing at his console with mounting frustration, Ensign Sean DePaul replied. Helm's not responding, sir, and phases have overloaded. Shall I own photon torpedoes? Scott protested. Torpedoes? At this range without shields? Are you mad? Excalibur's coming around for another pass, Riley declared. Spock had anticipated a scenario such as this weeks earlier when Enterprise had received its orders to participate in war games to test M5, famed scientist Richard Daystrom's latest invention. A multitronic computer he claimed could run a starship not only by itself, but also with greater speed and precision than with a living crew. Daystrom's boasts had proven disastrously true. Granted control of one Constitution-class starship, M5 had destroyed another and crippled 3 more in a single attack run. Its reaction times and ability to anticipate the responses of the 4 crewed vessels arrayed against it have been nothing less than superhuman. Rising from his chair, Spock asked, Mr. Scott, do you have access to our library computer? Aye, sir, Scott said as Spock joined him at the science station. Call up the data charts for Lexington and Hood's command consoles, Spock ordered. Keying in the request to the memory bank, Scott had said, here they come. The classified schematics appeared on the screen in front of him. He aimed a questioning look at Spock. Sir, are you doing what I think you're doing? We have no hopes of defeating M5 by orthodox methods, Spock said. There are 4, logic demands an unorthodox response. Why not call up Excalibur's console chat? Entering his command authorization into the system, Spock said, because M5 has no doubt anticipated this response and changed Excalibur's prefix codes. The first officer's voice drooped to a fearful whisper. Did Martinez and Commodore Wesley have done the same? Arching one eyebrow, Spock replied, in that case, Mr. Scott, we are all about to die. What kind of pep talk is that? Only from a Vulcan. Commodore Robert Wesley waved away the smoke, stinging his eyes, and barked orders at the crew of the ISS Lexington. Get those fires out, damn it! Horst, get a fix on Excalibur's position now! Number 1, tell engineering we need warp speed on the double. His crew seemed to be dazed. They responded to his commands as if trapped in slow motion. The Commodore pushed his way up to the upper deck of the bridge and shook the bloody-faced science officer until the man's eyes focused. Snap out of it, Clayton. Get those sensors working and report. Clayton nodded, turned, and hunched over the sensor console while he worked the controls. Wesley hurried back to the helm. He pushed the dead woman slumped in the chair to the deck, and then he armed the main phaser bank. I should never have trusted Daystrom and his crazy machine. He castigated himself. Scientist has seemed less than entirely stable, but his reputation as a genius who unlocked the secrets of duotronic circuitry decades earlier had been enough to earn a measure of Wesley's trust. Daystrom had assured Wesley that M5 can destroy Enterprise during the war games and make it look like an accident, thereby ridding Starfleet of Captain Spock and his sympathizers. Daystrom never said the multitronic system would try to kill the rest of us, too. Wesley raged as he locked his weapons on the approaching ISS Excalibur. His first officer, Commander Zeke Dowdy, called out from an auxiliary tactical station. Sir, Enterprise is falling back. Hail them. Wesley snapped at the communications officer. The slender Andorian Shen frantically flipped switches at her console. Comms are offline, she said, turning towards Wesley. Lexington's helms went dark under Wesley's hands, even as the ship accelerated into an attack maneuver against the fast approaching Excalibur. From the science station, Clayton shouted an alarm. Our self-destruct package has been armed. Scrambling to a command console, Doherty asked, Is it the M5? Negative, Clayton said, eyeing a computer readout. It's Enterprise! Doherty shouted, Engage the override! Damn you, Spock! Wesley fumed. He knew it would take his crew only moments to overcome the usurpation of their command console's prefix codes, but as he watched Excalibur bear down on the ship in the hood, he knew that those were moments he would never have. Spock sat facing Enterprise's main view screen and watched Excalibur pummel Hood and Lexington with phaser beams. The two crewed vessels flanked Excalibur at point-blank range and returned fire, their phaser beams flaring impotently against the shields of the computer-driven starship passing between them. Now, Spock said. Commander Scott pushed the button and the view screen flared white as Lexington and Hood exploded, exactly as Spock had programmed them to do. When the conflagration ended, only fragments remained of the 3 Constitution-class starships. The cloud of minuscule debris spread slowly against a cold backdrop of space and stars. All decks secure from red alert, Spock said. The crimson lights on the bulkhead ceased flashing. Moments later, Scott was at Spock's side with a data slate in hand. Mr. Deshalstead will have warp power restored in 2 hours, Captain. Very good, Mr. Scott. Please continue supervising repairs. Aye, sir. As Scott stepped away, Uhura swiveled in her chair towards Spock. Captain, Commodore Enright is requesting an update on the war games. She glanced at the view screen. Should I tell him M5 lost? Arching one eyebrow, Spock said, M5 outfought us 3-1, Lieutenant. It can hardly be said to have lost. Very well, sir. Should I tell the Commodore M5 malfunctioned? Yes, Spock said, though he did not believe the supercomputer's killing spree were to have been the least bit accidental. And you may add that M5 has been decommissioned. Aye, sir. Uhura went back to her station and relayed Spock's message to the commander of Starbase 6, which had hosted the ill-fated combat exercise. Spock steepled his fingertips in front of him as he pondered the day's tragic events. I seem to have underestimated the resentment my advancement has provoked, he brooded. All at once it became clear to him that the Tantalus field device would not be enough to guarantee his ascent to power. He was going to need allies. And so ends Chapter 4. As some of you who have followed Star Trek's entirety, at least the TOS, can be made aware, that chapter was based on another episode of Star Trek, where it was about Captain Kirk and the USS Enterprise was being selected to join in a war games with the USS Lexington, Excalibur, and Hood, with one of the ships being implanted with the M5 computer, which, as the book said, was meant to run a starship crew more effectively than by itself than with a manned crew. However, the M5 unit went awry and managed to basically cause a massive incident, resulting in the death of an entire starship crew. But How it was resolved in the TOS episode was Kirk managed to convince the M5 that what it was doing is wrong, using circular logic. After that, Daystrom was basically locked away because of his insanity. I did like how the M5 here acted, and for anyone who was curious, a similar display was actually shown in the video game Star Trek Shattered Universe, where there is a mission where you also have to take out an M5-driven computer. But instead of one ship, it was 4 ships that were commanded by the M5 unit. And the pincer maneuver that two of the ships that Lexington and Hood did on Excalibur would actually be replicated. Now, whereas the malfunction was accidental and wasn't meant to be there in the original, in the Prime universe, the Mirror universe, it's clear that Starfleet is trying to get rid of Spock. And Spock knows it, so we'll see what he does in response. Chapter 5: The Quality of Mercy. Elon, the dolmen of Elas, paced like a caged tiger. Spock watched the swarthy, lavishly bejeweled beauty prowl back and forth. She threw angry glances in his direction. They were alone together in Lieutenant Uhura's quarters, which Spock had designated as Ellen's, I'm going to just call her Ellen's, cabin for the duration of the mission. Grabbing a small statuette off a nearby tape shelf, she shouted, "You have no right to keep me here." She hurled the figurine at Spock, remained still and let it fly past, confident from the moment she'd thrown it at her. Her hysteria had compromised her aim. "I am a dolmen. On my world you would be—" "We are not on your world," Spock corrected her. "We are aboard the Enterprise, and as a passenger on this ship you are required to recognize my authority." A fiery fit of temper propelled her across the cabin to confront him, her eyes glistening with tears as she looked on the verge of weeping. "Have you no mercy, no compassion? I am a dolmen, born to rule, to conquer." A single tear rolled down her left cheek to her jaw. Spock noted the subtle manner in which she had lifted her chin, an invitation for him to wipe away her concocted grief. He turned his back on her. "I am well acquainted with the reputed properties of Elysian tears, dolmen." Spock stepped over to a small table that stood against one wall and set the toppled teacups upright once more. Lattice continued reviewing the protocol for introduction to the Troyan Caliph. Her footfalls were soft, the gentle pattering of bare feet on the carpeted deck. She approached him from behind him, and his keen Vulcan hearing was alert for any warning of an attack. Ellen had already stabbed and wounded Petri, the Troyan ambassador who was originally given the task of educating her in Troyan protocol. Because of Petri's subpar combat reflexes and ensuring convalescence in sickbay, the only person for whom Ellen would consent to receive further instruction in etiquette was the highest-ranking individual on the ship, its captain. She slipped past Spock, eyeing him first with suspicion, then with perverse amusement. "The Empire has never taken an interest in our conflict before," she said, dropping her voice to a slightly lower register, giving her words a smoky, seductive quality. "Some of the Empress's envoys have even encouraged us to fight." Moving past her seat at the table, she continued, "But now you arrive and convince Caliph Akil to accept a marriage as grounds for a truce and a treaty. Why?" "A non-violent resolution to the situation is the most desirable outcome for all parties," Spock said. "Not for me," Ellen shot back. "I much rather kill the Trojans down to the last infant. I've dreams of cleansing the world in fire and salting its ashes. How is this outcome desirable for me?" Spock pulled his communicator from his belt and flipped it open. A triple chirp signaled his standby channel was open. "Bring him in," he said to the device, and then he closed it and placed it back on his belt. Moments later, the door to the corridor opened. The 2 security guards dragged in Ellen's bodyguard, Crichton. The young man's clothes were torn, and his face was bruised and bloody. He was barely conscious. We caught him sending messages to a nearby Klingon cruiser, Spock said. He had been conspiring with them to sabotage this mission because of his desire. He desires you for himself. Absurd! Ellen cried. I am a dolman! She stared in horror at Crichton, who hung limply at the hands of two Starfleet guards. Disgust filled her voice with venom. You are but a lowly soldier. You could never be my mate, calmly Spock explained. Not as long as you remain dolman of Elas. However, once he had helped the Klingon conquer the Telon system, you would be equals, as slaves to the Klingon Empire. A minor step down the social ladder for Crichton, but a significant demotion for you. Oh, one moment. Just need to adjust something right quick. Go. Alright, let's see. A significant demotion for you. As she looked back at Crichton, her pity turned to fury. You will pay dearly for this, Crichton. Her bodyguard's eyes were dull and half glazed with pain. He lifted his head at the sound of her anger. I did what my heart bade me, Dolman, he croaked through bloody, swollen lips. I love you. You are not permitted to love one such as me. She whirled towards Spock. Captain, please tell your men to remove this presumptuous worm from my chambers. The captain nodded at the guards, pulled Crichton out of the cabin, and took him back to the brig for his imminent execution, which Spock has postponed only until after his planned exhibition. For a change, Ellen was silent. Spock concluded that she most likely was brooding over the sudden revelation that her staunch defender had been about to sell her into slavery. Finally, she broke her reverie. Captain, she asked, is that Klingon ship still nearby? Do they still plan to attack to prevent my wedding to Hakil? No, Spock said. I have dealt with the Klingons. Ellen looked quizzically at him. I heard no alerts, no sounds of combat. Did they flee, or did you strike your own bargain with them? They are no longer part of the equation, Dolman, he said. I suggest you leave it at that. The less said, Spock reasoned, the better. The Tantalus field devices enabled him to uncover Crichton's treachery. Once the Klingon ship's precise coordinates had been locked on, Spock had found it remarkably easy, the Tantalus field, to eliminate the Klingon crew en masse while leaving their vessel intact. He had already ordered Mr. Scott to capture the Klingon cruiser and tow it back to Starfleet 12 for a complete analysis, from its disruptors to a space frame. It was a fortuitous addendum to his growing list of accomplishments, but his principal objective for this mission remained incomplete. I have spared you from becoming a slave of the Klingons, Spock said, and I would also spare you the indignity of being enslaved by the Empire. Marry the Caliph of Troyes and end the war between your worlds. United for your mutual defense, you will be able to negotiate from a position of strength for your world's immensely valuable commodity. Perplexed, she tilted her head and squinted suspiciously. What commodity, Captain? This one, Spock said, reaching forward. He touched the long crystalline jewels that formed her ornate necklace, arcing downwards in a semicircle atop her chest. Dilithium crystals, more abundant than on your planet, than on Halkin or even on Korridan. Elis and Troyes are in possession of the largest natural deposits of high-quality dilithium in all of known space. But the Imperial engineers surveyed our planets decades ago, Ellen said, unable to hide surprise. They had found nothing of value. They lied, Spock said. Because your two worlds were so well armed and well fortified, it would have been exceptionally costly for the Empire to conquer you in open combat. It was easier to provoke you into a prolonged war of attrition, so that when your worlds became so weakened that they could no longer impose an invasion, the Empire would eradicate you all. The more he revealed, the sharper her focus became. Why are you telling me this now? Because the Klingons apparently are ready to conquer your worlds by force, an outcome Starfleet cannot permit. My orders are to halt your conflict by force of arms and subdue your worlds in preparation for an occupying force. For the marriage? Spock nodded his affirmation. A plan of my own making. If the Klingons attempt to annex your worlds, it would be better to repel their attacks if your defenses are intact and united. This will also reduce the number of Starfleet vessels and personnel that must be be committed to defending you, freeing our resources for other objectives, and preserving your autonomy from direct Imperial oversight. Slaughter would have been quicker, Ellen said. But less effective, Spock replied, and more costly. Better for all if peace can be achieved without impairing the value of either world to the Empire. For the first time since he had met Ellen, she smiled. You speak almost like a statesman, Captain Spock, and I say almost only because I've never heard one sound quite so reasonable. Then you will accept my proposal? Will you wed Caliph Hakil? She gave an enthusiastic nod. I will, she said with conviction, and I shall do more besides. Once our worlds are united, I will see to it that the exclusive mining rights for our dilithium are not given to the Empire. Before Spock can console her that defying the Empire might undo all the benefits of uniting with Troya, she added, I will instead grant them directly to you, Spock. She strode to the bed and sprawled herself across it. As a sign of my enduring gratitude, most kind, he said, fully aware of the understatement. With control over such an enormous wealth of dilithium crystals, Spock's path to the Admiralty was all but ensured. It was more than he had hoped for the intent ended only to cultivate a future ally in the person of Ellen. Instead, he had acquired himself a patroness, and a very generous one at that. Perhaps, he mused, I have underestimated the persuasive value of fairness and mercy. If it can spur such generosity in one, how will it affect the many? He resolved to find out. First the Hulkins, then the business was quartered on, whispered Montgomery Spock. Now a peace treaty is damned peculiar as it is. Huddled with him were McCoy and Uhura. Their clandestine meeting was safe from eavesdropping in a dimly lit maintenance bay on one of the lower decks in the secondary hull of the Enterprise. Scotty himself had personally rid the compartment of listening devices and set up surveillance countermeasures in the bulkhead around it. There were no place on the ship more private than this. I agree, McCoy said, leaning forward over a scuffed workbench. Spock's hand behaved oddly ever since the Halkin mission, when you asked Captain Kirk not to destroy the planet. Uhura got a ferocious look in her eyes. Our duplicates, she said, from the other universe. You think they got to him? I don't know, lass. I can't prove it, Spock said. McCoy's tone was sharp. You don't have to prove it. Starfleet ordered Spock to subdue Elis and Troyes, but he went and made them stronger than ever. They secured their dilithium rights for himself. He disobeyed fleet orders, Scotty. You can assassinate him for that. Not without orders from Starfleet Command, Spock said. I kept filing reports, but nothing happens. Pushing away from the workbench, Uhura sighed with anger and frustration. It's as if he's protected by the gods, she said. He disobeys Captain Kirk, and nothing. Seizes the ship, and nothing. Defies Starfleet Command, and nothing. It's like they're afraid of him. Maybe they are, McCoy said. After that business with the Klingon cruiser, I'm starting to fear him a little myself. Scott added, You didn't see it, lass. The whole ship was deserted, like the crew just up and vanished. His stare became distant and creased with horror, and his voice, already quiet, hushed even lower. Mess hall tables covered with plates of food half-eaten, the gravy still fresh on the knives, a half-buffeted pair of boots next to a bunk, the rag and the polish just lying on the deck. You can tell what every man on the ship was doing right before he vanished. He looked Uhura in the eye. And not one blood stain, not a single trace upon, no carbon scoring, no sign of a struggle. Just pieces of the lives they left behind. I never seen a weapon that can do that. She looked skeptical. Then what did it, Mr. Scott? Magic? Fairies and elves? A genie from a bottle? McCoy folded his arms and shrugged his shoulders. Maybe the legends are true, he said. Even in medical school, I heard about Vulcan psionics. Some people think they're telepaths. Others say they can be clairvoyant or precognitive. Hell, I heard that in ancient times, Vulcans could kill with a thought. Uhura rolled her eyes. And you really believe that? I don't know what to believe, McCoy said, but what I know is that 3 days ago, a Klingon ship was stalking us in the Tellan system. Then, less than an hour after Spock found it, it went adrift, and we boarded it to find every last member of his crew gone without a trace. Scott looked from McCoy to Uhura and lifted his brow imploringly. You'll have to admit, it seems a bit too convenient to be mere coincidence. But we have no proof, she said. We can't send a message to Starfleet Command that says we think Spock is using ancient telepathic powers to crush his enemies. You're telling me, McCoy grumbled. They proudly give him a medal and call him a hero of the Empire. Yeah, it is true, Fox. And the legends here are actually real in Star Trek lore. Vulcans do have the ability to kill with a single thought. In fact, the Stone of Gaul was an actual thing, which allowed a Vulcan to kill with a single thought. They wanted to part in the shadows and remain silent for a long moment. So, Uhura finally said, what are we going to do? Scott shook his head. There's nothing we can do. We don't have any proof Spock's been compromised, and Starfleet hasn't ordered us to take action. Maybe I can declare him mentally unfit, McCoy said. They'd say his broken a peace treaty was irrational, and he'd give you a half-dozen reasons why it's completely logical, Scott cut in. You should know by now not to argue logic with Spock. It's a losing proposition. You really think that Mira McCoy's intimidating? Honestly, I think he's just as goofy as his prime counterpart. Though it is mentioned earlier in the book that McCoy was under orders to torture his own father to death, so there's that. Uhura's temper flared higher by the moment. Listen to the two of you, she hissed, backpedaling away from them. She continued, nothing we can do. Losing proposition. You're not men. Men would stand and fight. Men would eliminate Spock now before his brand of appeasement spreads. But since neither of you seem willing to act like a man, she drew her dagger from her boot. I guess I'll have to do it for you. Scott tried to interpose himself between Uhura and the door, but he wasn't quick enough. She called him off and started backing out of the room. Where do you think you're going, lass? What do you think you're going to do? What you should have done, Mr. Scott, she replied. I'm going to kill Captain Spock before he... An incandescent flash of light and a lighting, almost musical ringing filled the air around Uhura. And when it faded, she was gone. No bloodstain, no phaser burns, no sign that she'd ever been there at all. All Scott could do was stare at the abrupt, empty space in the room where Uhura once stood. He tried to control his terror as he realized with a shudder the same fate might be about to befall him as well. A glance to his right confirmed McCoy was harboring the same brand of paranoid musing. Their shared horror was interrupted by the shrill whistling of the note of the intership comm, followed by the Captain Spock's baritone voice. Spock to Mr. Scott. Trading fearful looks with McCoy, Scott moved to a nearby panel and thumbed open a secure encrypted channel, to unmask his location if anyone happened to be monitoring for such information. Scott here. Mr. Scott, Spock said over the comm. Please meet me on the bridge at once. We need to discuss an adjustment to the bridge duty roster. A sick feeling churned in Scott's gut. He knew what was coming, but the protocol of the situation demanded he play along as if it didn't. The duty roster, sir. Spock's voice was ominous. Indeed, Mr. Scott. We appear to have an opening for a senior communications officer. Well, Jesus fuck. If you think Mira McCoy is intimidating, Mira Spock is just on a whole nother level of savagery. Rumors spread quickly on any starship, but some travel faster than others. I heard directly from Dr. Mbanga, Lieutenant Robert D'Amato said in a nervous whisper across the mess hall table, and he heard it from Dr. McCoy himself. It's just not possible, Lieutenant Winston Kyle said, hunched over his soup. People just don't wink out of existence. Mr. Scott saw it too, D'Amato said. Just zap, and she was gone. No blood, no ashes, nothing. Big deal, Kyle said. A phaser on full power can do the same thing. Seen it 100 times. But there wasn't any phasers in the room, D'Amato said. It's all been torn apart 3 times. Nothing. Kyle swallowed a spoonful of his soup and shook his head. You asked me, I think Scott McCoy killed her, and they made up this stupid story to cover their tracks. Lieutenant Michael DeSalle, who had taken over from Mr. Scott as chief engineer, put down his tray next to Kyle's and joined in the conversation. Be careful what you say, he said, keeping his voice low. Captain Spock hears everything. Rolling his eyes, Kyle asked, Now, you're paranoid too? DeSalle shrugged. Caution pays dividends on this ship. Always has, and you know that. He sliced through a rubbery-looking breast of a chicken. I heard Palmer got Uhura's job. She's keeping her distance from Mr. Scott, though. D'Amato shook his head. I don't know. Way I heard it, Scotty's being set up. Forget set up. He did it, Kyle said. Don't you guys remember that flap on Argelius, too? 3 women dead. All evidence pointing at Scotty, and all the charges got dropped. Thanks to Kirk, D'Amato said. Like any of us would have gotten that kind of favor. That's what I'm saying, Kyle continued. He has a history, and you know McCoy must have helped bury those forensic reports, so it's a lot easier to believe Scott sliced up Uhura and disintegrated the evidence than to pin it on some kind of crazy Vulcan psychic mumbo-jumbo. Sal took a sip of his drink and raised his eyebrow at Kyle. Don't be so quick to write off Vulcan's psionic powers, and if they can do half the things I've heard, we're lucky we outnumber them 7-1 in the Empire. You ought to hear what Mbega says about Vulcans, D'Amato said. He interned on Vulcan, saw things you wouldn't believe. He says they can read minds, plant delay suggestions, even control weak minds from a distance. And in one of their oldest legends, the most powerful Vulcans use something called the Stone of Gaul to kill people with just their thoughts. Destroy people's minds, even them from reality. Sounds like someone's been hitting the Romulan ale again, Kyle quipped to Sal. D'Amato's temper rose to the surface. You don't believe me? Go ask him, Benga. He'll tell you. Proving what? Kyle said. That he's crazy too? I think you're forgetting something, DeSalle said. Turning slowly to face DeSalle, Kyle asked, What's that? A wan smile crept across DeSalle's face. The Klingon cruiser, he said. Its entire crew missing, like they've been beamed out of their seats into space. Oh, you've gotta be kidding me, Kyle said. Can you really not think of a single way that could have been done without some kind of magical trick? Occam's razor, guys. What makes more sense? That cloaked Romulan ships used transporters to kidnap and dematerialize the Klingon crew? That Captain Spock thought about it really hard and made all the Klingons go poof? There are no evidence of Romulans were anywhere near, D'Amato said. DeSalle added. Or they could use transporters while cloaked. Kyle nodded. Exactly. And there's no evidence Vulcans have amazing psionic powers that can vaporize people, but which explanation sounds like it has a better chance of being true? When neither DeSalle nor D'Amato replied after several seconds, Kyle shook his head in disgust, stood up and picked up his tray. And you call yourselves men of science. He grumbled, stalking away to turn in his half-eaten lunch. D'Amato and the chief engineer watched Kyle leave the mess, and they continued eating their own lunches. Kyle's story does actually make more sense, D'Amato admitted. I know, Sal replied. He washed down another mouthful of chicken before he added, but I still think Mbango's right. Checking to make sure no one was eavesdropping, D'Amato whispered back. So do I. It didn't take long for the stories to spread beyond the confines of the Enterprise. Missives sent via subspace radio carried word of Captain Spock's eldritch powers throughout the Empire. Tales traded during shore leaves and transfers from crewman to crewman and from officer to officer, inflated to the story with each retelling. Within a few months, Spock's powers were said to be on par with those of ancient Vulcan myths. His name became synonymous with power, and the terror he inspired made his growing reputation for mercy, compromise, and restraint all the more beguiling. Why, many wondered, would a man who could destroy any foe choose to promote peace? That question now preoccupied Empress Hoshi Sato III. At the head of an oblong table, she presided over a meeting of her senior advisors in the war room of the Imperial Palace on Earth. Sheltered deep below the planet's surface, the vast oval chamber was illuminated solely by the glow of its massively displayed screens, which ringed the walls. Grand Admiral Garth, she said, eyeing the notorious flag officer from Iser. Where is Captain Spock now? Side conversations around the table fell away to silence as Grand Admiral Kevlar Leonard Garth, or Kelvar Leonard Garth, straightened his posture and replied to the young monarch. Your Majesty, Captain Spock and the Enterprise have just returned from this successful mission into the Romulan neutral zone. They are en route to Starbase 10 with a captured Romulan bird of prey in tow. And the disposition of the Romulan crew? Sato asked. Garth shifted slightly before he answered. Eliminated, Your Majesty. The ship is empty. A nervous murmur worked its way around the table. Empress Sato did not like the fearful tune this report was striking up among her cabinet. In a pointed manner, she inquired, By what means were they dispatched, Admiral? Garth cocked his head nervously. The boarding party was not able to determine that, Your Majesty. But the ship was manned when Enterprise made contact with it, yes? The Admiral nodded. Yes, Majesty. Sato nodded slowly. Pressing the question further would serve no purpose than to embarrass Admiral Garth and make herself seem insecure or fearful. She had ascended to the throne less than 9 months earlier and was determined not to be perceived as weak. What might my first royal namesake have done? She adjusted her tactics to turn the scenario to her advantage, or at the very least to postpone the crisis until she had amassed sufficient political capital to entertain greater risks. If memory serves, Admiral, similar circumstances attended Spock's capture of a Klingon cruiser just a few months ago, correct? Yes, Majesty, Garth said, and his family and heirs have secured the dilithium mining rights on the Talon system. Again, Garth dipped his chin and confirmed. Yes, Majesty. And it seems to me that Captain Spock is an officer of greater resources than we thought, Sato proclaimed, projecting her voice to the far end of the table. Admiral Garth, move Captain Spock to the top of the list for new Admiralty appointments. As you wish, Majesty, Garth replied, but granting him that kind of power could be dangerous. Sato frowned. Clearly, Spock is already dangerous, she said. Prudence would suggest we try to make an ally of him. Apparently, Garth was unconvinced. And if elevating his rank only fuels his ambition? In that case, she said, her melodic voice laced with menace, we shall make an example of him instead. Things are escalating quicker and quicker every time we turn the page. What was it? It started out with the M5 incident, then the situation in the Talon system. Uhura gets freaking vaporized, and now we're dealing with Hoshi Sato III, who murdered her predecessor, by the way, into talking about trying to spin this to her advantage. I don't think she's going to be wise enough to deal with a Vulcan. What do you think, Fox? I don't think she's been around enough Vulcans. Just the way that Spock not only eliminated Uhura, but the calm demeanor in which he played it off. That is intimidating. 2269. Chapter 6. Vices of Authority. Welcome to Elba 2, Captain Spock, said Grand Admiral Garth, or he was commonly known, Garth of Izar. The handsome, silver-haired flag officer gestured to a seductively attired female Orion companion. This is my prime consort, Marta. The green-skinned woman curtsied to Spock and flashed a grin that hinted at the madness lurking behind her eyes. Spock greeted Garth and his concubine with polite nods. Thank you, Admiral. Allow me to introduce my wife, Lieutenant Commander Marlena Moreau. He gestured at Marlena, who bowed her head at Garth before shooting a quick but poisonous glare at Mark. A pleasure, Garth said, returning Marlena's slight bow. Gesturing at the dignitary-packed ballroom behind him, he said, Your banquet awaits, Captain. Garth and Marta led Spock and Marlena into the thick of the party. Among the guests crowded into the gilded room of the Elba II governor's mansion, where many high-ranking high-ranking members of the Starfleet Admiralty, as well as a dozen or so local planetary governors. All were accompanied by their spouses or lovers, and several also were attended by one or more aide-de-camp. Marlena clutched at Spock's arm excitedly as they walked together. "Isn't it magnificent?" she asked, her eyes darting from one splendor to the next. "Admiral," Spock said to Garth, "I wish to thank you for personally officiating my advancement ceremony. It is a great honor to be so recognized." The Grand Admiral of Starfleet gave Spock a cordial slap on the back. "The honor is all mine, Captain. Your defeat of M5 is almost as famous as my victory at Exenar." Lowering his voice and cocking one eyebrow, he added with obvious admiration, "And might I say, your victory was twice as ruthless. Sacrificing Hood and Lexington was genius, Captain. If that oaf Wesley had thought of it, this would be his banquet instead of yours." "Indeed," Spock said. He let the Grand Admiral make the introductions as they circuited the cavernous room. Socially mandated exchange of pleasantries took significantly longer than an hour. As they reached the end, Marlena's demeanor had devolved from weariness to boredom to outright surliness. It seemed fortunate, then, that the ceremony itself was brief and perfunctory. Standing with Spock at the center of the room, Garth had only as much as Starfleet regulations required for the promotion to be official. And then he pinned Spock's new rank insignia on the uniform. Garth beckoned a waiter, plucked two flutes of Delton champagne from the bullion's tray, and handed them to Spock and Marlena. He then took two more for himself and Marta before shooing away the server. Raising his drink and his voice, he announced, "A toast to Starfleet's newest flag officer, Admiral Spock. May your record be one of strength and glory." In their unison, the crowd cheered, "Strength and glory." Spock bowed his head in humble recognition of the accolade as the room's occupants sipped from their drinks in his honor. The only VIP in the room, to whom Spock and Marlena had not yet been introduced, emerged from the crowd and smiled. "Admiral Spock, Commander Moreau," said the well-dressed human man with distinctly Asian features. "I'm Governor Donald Cole. I apologize for missing the ceremony, but I was occupied on official business." He offered his hand to Spock. "No apologies is necessary, Governor," Spock said, shaking the man's hand. "Governor," Marlena said, holding out her hand to Corey, who lifted it and kissed the back of it lightly. Corey's demeanor turned somber. "Let me also expand my condolences on the passing of Dr. McCoy. Xenopolycythemia is a terrible way to die." "Indeed," Spock said. It was unfortunate to lose such a skilled surgeon in his prime. Fortunately, Dr. Mbenga has proved to be an able successor." "I'm glad to hear that," Corey said, and he nodded at Garth. "At the Grand Admiral's request, I offer you both my suite for the night, as the first of your many rewards for ascending to the Admiralty." "Too kind, Governor," Spock said. "We are honored to accept." "Excellent. The room's prepared. You may retire at your leisure." "Thank you, Governor," Spock said, adding with a nod at Garth, "Admiral?" Spock took Marlena's arm gently and guided her away from the duo and toward a nearby buffet table. As they crossed the room, Spock sensed Garth and Corey continuing to observe Marlena. As soon as they seemed to be out of earshot, Marlena whispered to Spock, "I don't trust them." "Nor do I," Spock said. "The fact Admiral Garth arranged in advance for us to reside overnight on the planet's surface suggests that he has an agenda that hinges on our continued presence." Picking up a clean plate and wearing an insincere smile, Marlena said, "In other words, we're being led into a trap." "Precisely," Spock said. She grabbed a serving fork and speared a ring of pineapple from a platter of sliced fruit. "Then let us eliminate Garth and Corey now. A preemptive strike." "No," Spock said. "Our actions must be circumspect, and our reactions proportional. Unless the Grand Admiral reveals intentions, we will bide our time." "So we do nothing?" Marlena asked before taking a bite of pineapple. Casting a subtle look back at Garth and Corey, Spock replied, "Biding our time does not mean lowering our guard." He met Marlena's conspiratorial stare. "The next move is Garth's. The last move will be ours." Standing naked in the bedroom of his private suite inside the Elba II Governor's mansion, Garth said to Marta, It's time. Using cellular metamorphosis powers he had learned decades earlier from the Antosians, Garth changed his shape to a nearly identical likeness of Admiral Spock. Speaking with pitch-perfect imitation of the Vulcan's baritone, he asked the Orion concubine, "How do I look, my love?" She ran her hands over his chest and gazed lustfully up at him. "Good enough to eat," she said, her voice almost a growl. Pushing him in a futile effort to force him onto the bed, she added, "I think I'm going to like this game." Garth grabbed Marta by the shoulders and shoved her aside. "This isn't foreplay, darling. This is war." "Spoil sport," she said, pouting as she sat on the bed, rebuffed and angry. He turned and studied the fine details of his appearance in a mirror. "I spent years keeping my eye on Kirk," he said. "I never dreamed it would be his Vulcan first officer I'd have to worry about." Noting one of his eyebrows resting at too sharp an angle, he adjusted it with a thought. "Ever since Kirk disposed Pike, I've suspected he has some sort of secret weapon." Satisfied with his appearance, he turned towards Marta. Judging from Kirk's service record, it was probably something found at Dr. Adams' House of Horrors on the Tantalus colony. "And now you think Spock has it," Marta said, sounding pleased with her own meager powers of deduction. Mimicking his subject, he raised one eyebrow. "Indeed." He picked up a communicator programmed to duplicate the signal encryption used on Spock's device. "If I'm right, and Spock catches some sort of superweapon from Kirk, then he's 10 times more dangerous than Kirk ever was. Kirk was a thug. All he wanted was power and glory. But this Vulcan, he called himself a reformer. Power won't satisfy him. He won't stop until he tears down the Empire." Mara replied, "So? Kill him then." Garth as Spock smirked at his impetuous paramour. "Not until I find that weapon, my love." He gently pinched her chin and lifted it so she would look into his eyes. "I plan to beam up to the Enterprise as Spock, search his quarters, and find that device." Stroking her cheek, he added, "Once I have it, I'll terminate him, his wife, and his senior officers." He ran his fingers through Marta's hair, which was as black as the starless night. "And then, my flower, we'll pay a visit to Empress Sato III and take her throne for ourselves." He flipped up the communicator's grill and opened a channel. "Spock to Enterprise." "Scott here," came the reply. "Go ahead, Admiral." "One to beam up," Garth said. "Aye, sir," Commander Scott said. "Queen to Queen's level 3. "I'm in no mood to banter," Garth snapped. "Mr. Scott, I said beam me aboard." Unfazed, Scott answered. "I said Queen to Queen's level 3. Why was the Enterprise's first officer being so obstinate? "We have no time for chess problems, Mr. Scott. Beam me aboard." "I'm following your orders, Admiral. Queen to Queen's level 3. Garth struggled to suppress his rage. Spock had somehow learned of his shape-shifting abilities and taken a precaution against it being used to impersonate him on his own ship. After a brief pause, Garth said, "Very good, Mr. Spock. I will contact you later. Spock out." He flipped shut the communicator's cover, then pounded his empty fist against the wall and let out a roar of fury as he transmuted back to his own form. At last he bellowed, "Damn that half-Vulcan bastard! I might not be able to bluff my way onto the Enterprise, but I can still order it blown to pieces." He flipped over the communicator and reset his frequency to hail his flagship. "Guards to Imperius!" Though they were the last words he ever spoke. Before his XO could reply, a flash of light consumed him, and the last thing he heard was Marta's terrified scream. Marlena brushed the tip of her index finger over the teardrop-shaped trigger of the Tantalus field device. A second time had put an end to Marta's hysterical shrieking. She returned the device to its standby mode. Its resonant hum filled her and Spock's quarters on the Enterprise until its concealing wall panel lowered into place. Then the only sound in the compartment was the low thrumming of the ship's impulse engines and the white noise of its ventilation system. Her task completed, she took a communicator from her belt and flipped its cover open. "Marlena to Spock." "Spock here. You're cleared to return." "Acknowledged. Stand by." The channel clicked off, and Marlena closed her communicator. Seconds later, the room brightened to a swirling column of light shimmering into view, with a few meters from where she was standing. The air rang with the musical drone of the transporter effect as Spock materialized. As soon as the last sparkles faded from his person, he stepped towards Marlena. "Well done," he said. He passed her and walked into their bedroom. She followed him. "How did you know about Garth's ability?" "It was one of many secrets I found in Captain Kirk's logs after I killed him," Spock explained, removing the tunic of his dress uniform. He had been researching Garth's history on Antos IV as a prelude to moving against him. Though I had not been able to confirm the Grand Admiral's shape-changing abilities prior to this visit, it seemed prudent to safeguard against it. Flushed with adrenaline from the kill, Marlena pressed herself against Spock's back. "A wise decision, my love. Now that he's gone, the fleet can answer to you as this Grand Admiral." Spock stepped away from her and turned about. "No," he said. Marlena's brow creased with anger and confusion. "Why not?" "It's too soon," Spock said. "I have been an admiral for less than 5 hours. If I lay claim to that title now, I will earn the contempt of every flag officer in Starfleet. Furthermore, the rank of Grand Admiral is bestowed only by imperial decree. If the Empress denies my claim to advancement, my own crew be obliged to execute me for treason." Slumped onto the bed, Marlena felt a tide of disappointment wash over her. "In other words, you'll never become Grand Admiral." Her remark drew a hard look from Spock. Feeling as if she needed to explain herself, she added, "You know the Empress will never permit it." "Yes, she will," Spock said, "because when the time comes for me to take control of Starfleet, I will make certain she has no other choice." That concludes Chapter 6. So, it seems now that Grand Admiral Garth and Marta were actually characters from the TOS series as well, where there was actually a whole episode dedicated to them, where Kirk and the Enterprise actually had actually went to where Garth was actually imprisoned in a mental institution. Now, one thing about Garth of Iser is that he mentioned something called Axon. That was actually a main point of contention within the Star Trek fan base, being that the Battle of Axanar was actually an event that was described but never seen in person, and it was a subject of the fan-made film Star Trek Axanar. I believe, unfortunately, that CBS just basically took out that fan project. But it was a point of significant conflict between the United Federation of Planets and the Klingon Empire. One of the biggest conflicts of the fight, actually, because it actually detailed the battle before the introduction of the Constitution-class starships, which was what turned the tide of the war between the Federation and the Klingons. And Garth of Iser was the one in charge of the battle, who won it decisively. Queen to Queen's Level 3 was actually another reference to the show, as it was a counter code, basically a way of Kirk to communicate to the ship, and that if he needed to be transported back to the Enterprise, the crew would be able to beam Kirk aboard, knowing that it was actually him and not a duplicate. So it seems that even Spock, or even the Grand Admiral of the Imperial Starfleet, was unable to outmaneuver the Vulcan. Ooh. 7 chapters in. Not too bad. And this is actually... what do y'all think of this book? I really do enjoy this book myself. I'm a big fan of the Mirror Universe in Star Trek. And I really do like how it's been portrayed in the novel series. Now, to put it into context, I do have a lot of the Mirror Universe novels from David Mack. From Glass Empires, where all of this started, all the way to the one that concludes the Mirror Universe arc in Rise Like Lions. A couple of the books, but 3 of them precisely, are nothing more than short stories, whereas the other ones are full-on dedicated full-length novels. I might read them as well after Sorrows of Empire. Um, it's been 2 hours. I think I am I'm going to end it here. If anything else, this has been a work on my voice. So I do appreciate everyone for joining me, and once again, uh, I am, along with a few others, are helping to get Nuppy Z a new computer. So if y'all can, if y'all are able to donate, you can click on the link on the pinned comment above. Any amount will help immensely, and even if you can't spare the money, all I can ask is that you spread the word. Let's see, who's there to ring? Oh, I already got someone. We're gonna raid our good friend Petra. So, until next time, everyone. I believe the next stream I will do will probably be, it might be System Shock Remake. I might be able to do System Shock 2 if I can get Uchu to it to help with it. I might do Turok 2 with Fox and Uchu again, but we'll see. Until next time, everyone, I am Turok, and I will see you all next time.